When people first come and talk to WellSafe about moving overseas, quite often the financial side is actually the easy part. We work through your business, we look at your tax position, we look at your assets, your structures, what needs to happen in Australia and what needs to be established overseas. And by the time we've worked through all of that, financially the direction often becomes pretty clear. But that's usually when a completely different conversation begins. I had exactly this happen with a husband and wife recently. We'd spent a considerable amount of time working through their businesses, their financial position, and what needed to happen for them to establish their life overseas. From a financial and business perspective, it made enormous sense. They saw the strategy, they saw the opportunity, they were already preparing to put their Australian business under management so you wouldn't depend on them being there day to day. And then the wife started talking to me about something completely different, their home, which she loved. She didn't want to sell it simply because they were moving overseas. So her question was, can we keep the house? And then she said, we've also got 2 dogs. And suddenly we weren't talking about tax anymore. We were talking about their life because she loved her dogs. They'd already looked into what it would be involved in taking them overseas. And she was torn. Her head was telling her one thing, but her heart was telling her, I can't let them go. Now, to somebody looking at international planning purely through a tax or financial lens, that might sound like a small issue. It's not. That's their family. And I've learned over the years that sometimes it's these seemingly small questions that determine whether an international strategy actually works for a family. Because families don't live on organizational charts. You can have the tax strategy worked out. You can have the corporate structure worked out. You can know exactly what needs to happen with the business. But then real life enters the conversation. What happens with the children? Maybe they're adults and they're remaining in Australia. Maybe they're younger and schooling becomes an issue. What about aging parents? What if you want to remain close enough to Australia to spend meaningful time with them? What about your home? Does it actually need to be sold? Can it remain part of your Australian investment position? Who is going to live there? And sometimes that home isn't just an asset. It's a long-term family asset. It may ultimately form part of the family succession planning or provide something for the next generation. Establishing your life overseas doesn't necessarily mean everything you've built in Australia needs to be sold or dismantled. And sometimes the husband and wife themselves have completely different priorities. One might be looking at the business opportunity, the financial outcome, the next stage of wealth creation. The other might be thinking, where are we actually going to live? How close will we be to the children? What happens to mum and dad? What happens to the dogs? Will I actually enjoy my life there? Neither person is wrong. They're just looking at the same future through different lenses. And that's why these conversations need to happen before implementation, because the objective isn't to create a technically perfect structure and then tell the family, now you need to make your life fit around this. It's the opposite. We need to understand the family we're designing the strategy for. What are your non-negotiables? What needs to remain in Australia? What needs to change? Who do you need to remain connected to? And what does each person actually need from the life you're creating overseas? Because choosing where you live isn't simply about finding the jurisdiction with the lowest tax rate. You might want to be close enough to Australia that you can get on a plane and be back within a few hours. You might want to remain in a similar time zone because of your business. You might want great access to healthcare. You might want beaches, restaurants, a strong expat community. Maybe it's golf. Maybe it's yoga. Maybe it's simply being able to walk to the gym every morning. Those things aren't peripheral to the strategy. They are part of the strategy, because there's very little point creating financial freedom in a country where you don't actually want to live. Now, if becoming a non-resident of Australia is part of that strategy, the relocation itself needs to be genuine. We're talking about establishing your life overseas. But establishing your life overseas doesn't mean every person and every asset in your family suddenly has to leave Australia with you. Your adult children may continue their lives in Australia. Your Australian business may continue operating under management. You may retain appropriate Australian investments. Your parents may remain there. Those circumstances all need to be considered properly as part of your overall residency and international strategy. And this is why I think family alignment is so important. Alignment doesn't mean everybody has to want exactly the same thing. It means everybody understands what you're doing, why you're doing it, what it means for them, because you can create an incredible financial outcome. But if one spouse is miserable, if you've moved somewhere that looks perfect on paper but doesn't suit the life you actually want, or something as seemingly simple as what happens to our dogs becomes an enormous emotional problem, then we've missed an important part of the planning. Because ultimately, this isn't just a tax strategy, it's your life. And I think that's something people can lose sight of when they start looking at international planning. The objective isn't simply to pay less tax. It isn't simply to establish an offshore company, and it isn't simply to become a non-resident of Australia. It's to create a life that gives you greater freedom, greater choice, and greater control without losing sight of the people and things that made you want that freedom in the first place. Your family shouldn't have to fit around a structure. The structure should fit around your family. And once the family side is clear, we can turn to the next major piece of the strategy, your business. Because if you're going to establish your life overseas, your business needs to be prepared for that transition too. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in the next episode.